I didn't actually say when it was going to be set. I guess
Some folks, if there's some compelling innovation and simplicity here. Bona fortuna, I don't know what that means. But that's what someone said in the chat. Great talk.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Trying to get the slides up?
Yeah, just booting up.
Oh, I thought you had it plugged in and it wasn't working. I was like, oh.
No, not yet.
You go on HDMI?
Yeah.
Then it should just work once you plug it in.
Hi everybody, welcome to EdTech and Gaming, Rebuilding Bridges. This is only a half-hour talk, so gotta go quick. So just a brief introduction, my name is Danny Silvers. I am CEO of Lantana Games. We are a local indie studio focused on mentoring the next generation of game developers. I'm a Boston native, but I am a graduate of the Savannah College of Art and Design, one of the original co-founders of Boston Fig. As mentioned, I'm a student and game development mentor. I got games on Steam back when it was tough to do so, before Greenlight and before just the floodgates opened. Projects you may know me from include Children of Liberty, Early Access, about Power Rangers Ride, Mondrian Abstraction and Beauty, about art history, and the upcoming sequel, Plastic Reality. Go. So why give this talk? Well, so essentially I grew up with educational games. I played a lot of stuff from the Learning Company and from MEC, including like the Super Solvers, Seekers series, the Munchers, and of course, who didn't play Oregon Trail in school. It was a big part of my life, not just at school, but also after school, you know, playing these games that had an educational influence, but weren't necessarily like blatantly upfront, you know, kind of chocolate covered broccoli, this is a test kind of game. My present, I run a studio that is devoted to making kids games, to making educational games, stuff that is inspired by the old Learning Company, MEC, Humongous Entertainment, Broader you name it. This early 90s mentality, kind of doing the retro thing that just about everybody else is doing, but from a different perspective, not just pixel graphics. And I see educational games, once again, as our future. The indie revolution, starting about 2008, 2009, really did this thing where they defined the mechanic as the message. And I think we can bring similar ideas to learning. So our learning mission at Lantana Games is to put the games and the gamer first. So games need to be fun and not just chocolate-covered broccoli. When kids get home from school, they want to still play a game, and if parents can find something for their kids that they're still getting a positive influence from and an educational experience from, then all the better. In terms of the mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics framework, this was even mentioned earlier today. Learning is dynamic. So for instance, it's all about the interactivity. It's not about the data. It's not about the doing. It's really about the experience and what you can take away from the game. So for instance, in our game Mondrian, over on the left, that is just all about kind of learning by observing, almost as if you're in a museum. And then with Children of Liberty, we're building this historically accurate representation of Boston out toward Lexington in 1775, and learn by exploring and uncovering mysteries of the time, etc. What we've noticed is that players lose interest in games if the mechanics are education-based. The problem with education is, and I'm about to go into this some more, but it's too repetitive and it's not rewarding. So, why do educational games suck in 2019? I was going to make a joke about it's the money, but I don't have time for that particular slide. But basically, what everything comes down to is it's memorization versus problem solving. It's the way we teach versus the way we play. Gaming rewards creativity, thinking outside the box, mastery, trial and error, versus education rewards routine and memorization, mastery via repetition. Essentially, there is no speed running in Common Core. As you grok a game, you learn the ins and outs of it. You can find different ways through that game, maybe even ways the designer didn't intend. Versus if you're doing a math test, you look in the back of the textbook, unless the textbook got it wrong, 2 + 2 = 4. That's just kind of how it goes. Next up, as of right now, educational games are very focused on the classroom. And educational developers in particular are very focused on schools. They're not so focused on what kids are doing when they get home from school. There's currently a disconnect between schools, investors, and developers. Brandon Pitzer at Filament puts it very succinctly. The K-12 sales process requires the super high-touch, heavily conversation-based sale, where you're in the school a lot, you're talking with all the stakeholders, you're talking to the district's technology folks and the curriculum folks, and you'll often find that those folks are not aligned. The problem is you just want to make a game, and you've got all these different people telling you what needs to be in your game. You've got the curriculum people saying you need to cover this topic and this in order to, specifically hit these, maybe 1 to 3 weeks of a class. And then you've got the technology people saying, no, it needs to have this feature, and this feature in order to fit these new devices that we're bringing into the school system. And, you trying to make all that gel together, and you're just like, is it even going to be fun in the end? That is the big problem. Us as game designers, we're always looking for the fun, and there's a lot of people, trying to tell us, no, don't make it fun, just teach what's in the textbook. So, where did the bridge get burned? That is the big question. And I keep coming back to, as I mentioned, one of my biggest influences when it comes to games development, and that is the crash of the Learning Company. So the Learning Company was founded in 1980 out in California, and then it was great times between 1980 and 1995. They made a lot of games. They had a lot of success. So in 1995, SoftKey acquired the Learning Company for $606 million. That's a nice chunk of change right there, and you can start getting things done. Then 3 years later, Mattel comes in, buys the company for $4.6 billion. Billion with a B. It's an extra 3 zeros on top. So, within 2 years then, Mattel sold the company for $6 million less than than SoftKey had bought it for just 5 years earlier. So within 120, how many months? Oh yeah, within 24 months, sorry. Yeah, I can do math. Within 24 months, it had lost nearly 90% of its valuation. So it was dead. And they sold it off, and now the rights to all the games are sitting in a drawer somewhere at Houghton Mifflin over in Copley Square. And it's sad to think about. But a couple years ago, this new company was founded called GlassLab. And GlassLab's goal was to develop games and tools related to educational development. They wanted to research design techniques toward making educational games more fun and more accessible. And they intended to distribute educational games and mods in particular. The goal was to make it, a classroom-based STEAM. So the description was GlassLab brings together leaders in commercial games and experts in learning and assessment. And it was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation. So, it was off to a great start. Except they just closed. Literally less than 2 months ago. So what happened? First of all, in 5 years, only 15 games were available on the platform. If you look on the App Store, if you look on Steam, if you look on itch.io, and you search for the educational tag, you may or may not find a lot of titles that are serious, but you're going to find a lot of titles. And GlassLab could only manage 15 games total in 5 years. That's 3 games a year. And in the mainstream market right now, 775 games are getting uploaded just onto Steam every month. They were far too focused on modding pre-existing games and internal development. They had mods up there for The Sims and for Plants vs. Zombies. And, as fun an idea as that is, they left basically every developer on the planet out, and that is a mistake. Despite targeting schools, they had 0 school outreach. They didn't know who to talk to in the school systems. They never bothered talking to educators, talking to administrators, talking to the tech people, talking to anybody. And then they left indies out. So there's plenty of indies that are doing educational work, and before you knew it, they shuttered. So, the thing is, though, the GlassLab model has, I think, some potential. So what can, you do? 1, open up game submissions, but obviously curate. You can have a Wild West kind of system like itch.io has, where you just let every single game in. Problem is, right now we're also seeing a bunch of parody educational games like Baldi's Basics. And those get tagged as educational. And that's not necessarily what teachers are looking for. So you would want some educators at the top who are curating submissions onto this platform. You want to open source assessment tools. A lot of these grading tools that are getting built into educational games these days tend to be proprietary, and so there's no way of new educational developers quite knowing what is going to be expected in terms of assessments in these games. So it's kind of just a best guess approach. Versus if this was an open source system, they could just get implemented and developers wouldn't have to question what they needed. Actually approach target audience at educational and gaming conventions. This is a big one. It goes for any developer, any publisher. You got to get out there, you got to sell your product, you got to get people on board. Focus on original titles and not mods. And that goes along with number 5, quit the contract development. Stop running the treadmill. Get out of the cycle, make new things, and excite the market. So then, there's even more bad news, and this comes down to COPPA violations. That is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. This was passed a few years ago to protect children's privacy, particularly in mobile games. And recently, mobile kids games and educational games, because they're on standard ad networks, kids have been seeing ads for beer and cigarettes. They've been getting political campaign ads. They've been getting ads where you're unable to actually close the ad before you do something, whether it's like swipe or watch a 10-second video, etc. And the problem with this is that kids tend not to know where the game ends and where the ad begins. They don't understand the break between the two of them. So they think that they have to tap on the Bud Knight in order to continue playing the game. And finally, these companies are doing data mining in some of these kids games, and that actually is against the law for games that are targeted under a specific age group. I think it's even just 5. You're not allowed to be gathering data on what the user is up to while they're playing that game. So, quote from this Reuters article that I have listed there, stunning 95% of commonly downloaded apps that are marketed to or played by children age 5 and under contain at least one type of advertising, according to a new report in the Journal of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics. And that goes for apps labeled as educational too, researchers say. The question then is, because so many developers are focusing on the classroom instead of after school, do we really want the Bud Knight in schools? So there's a lot to sort out, and we've only got 13 minutes to sort it out, so let's see what we can do. So educator needs. Number 1, educators, teachers want games that appeal to students and fit the curriculum. They want games that take multiple classes to complete, or perhaps games that are the entire focus of the class, like what Minecraft Educational Edition has become. They want assessment tools, ways that they can quickly grade their students on their interactions in the game. And most importantly, they want to be able to learn the game in one sitting. You don't want a teacher to have to take an entire semester just to master the game in order to teach it to the kids. It has to be simple and easy enough for them to access, and therefore for the students to access. Students want games that are fun. Students don't want to be bored in class. They want to be excited. They want games, even more specifically, that they can buy when they get home, whether it is the same exact game that they get in class, or whether the one they have in class is slightly modified to be a little more school-centric. That's up to the developer, that's up to the technology people in the school systems, but they want to be able to say, wow, this is a lot of fun, I want to play this when I get home. They want games that they can play with their friends, whether it is multiplayer or just 2 kids sitting in front of the TV playing the game, passing the controller between each other. You gotta have some kind of a communal aspect to it. And they want games that aren't glorified tests, no chocolate-covered broccoli, nothing that's just like boring, but looks shiny. Technology needs. There's a lot of opportunities here. I personally feel that we need an education-friendly ad network, whether that was like run by PBS or something along those lines, where these educational and kids game developers can know this is a network that we can make money on, that is not going to break federal regulations when these ads come up. We need stricter vetting of family and educational titles, particularly in the big marketplaces like the App Store, where there is no vetting for these kinds of titles, and you can just tag it whatever. Who knows what you're getting out there? So, maybe considering that we're talking about a target audience of children, I personally feel that it is important that those titles are targeted correctly. Easy to integrate educational APIs. Discussed this already with assessment tools and everything else that goes along with that. And low system requirements. It's pretty important that these games run on toasters, not just because the school system very rarely will upgrade their technology, but you also don't know what the students have access to at home. These may be low-income areas, these may be low-income countries even. There may just be students that aren't quite as well off as some of their classmates, but they still want to play the games. Developer needs. So developers need a clear view of curriculum and opportunities. What are the schools looking for in terms of educational games in particular classes? Can the school systems offer anything up? Are there game publishers or even educational publishers willing to put some money toward development of these titles? Hear what teachers want. Obviously, developers need to be reaching out to teachers in particular areas and saying, hey, if there was a game in this subject or this topic that you're teaching, what would you want the kids to do? Hear what students want. Kids don't normally think about, an educational game. They want to go home and play Fortnite. But if, you have the opportunity to talk to students and say, if you could be playing a game about what you're learning in class, what would you want to play? Private investment, this goes across the entire spectrum of the game industry, obviously, but finding investment, particularly for education, there's more money in games than there is in education, but that's not saying much. And obviously access to necessary resources, tools, and technology, knowing what the school systems have in place, and what platforms you should be targeting as an educational developer. What can educators and parents do? Do your research, communicate with developers, and support them. Buy the games, back the crowdfunding campaigns, find what games match your and the students' needs, and talk to us. We're out here, we're making stuff, we want to know what you want. What can developers do? Obviously, focus on the consumer. There's niche subjects you can touch. There's innovative technology like AR, VR, and just make fun games. Focusing on the classroom, you're not going to be focusing on the fun as much. But if you focus on after school, yeah, you can bring some livelihood into that. Don't necessarily cater to the curriculum. It's handy to know what the school system wants in there, but it shouldn't be like the force of God guiding you. Aim for games that are timeless. It's one thing to make a game for like one specific class and one curriculum, but the curriculum is changing all the time. Can't keep up with it. You're better off making a game that teaches general arithmetic than trying to focus on like the common core, fill in the bubble weirdness. And then, schools come second. The schools are not going to fund your game. There's no guarantees that they're going to buy it. There's lots of back and forth and miscommunications. So really, keep focusing on the consumer. What can investors do? Revitalize the sector because there's developers making stuff. Try to increase commercial output and view all platforms as learning devices, even the Switch, for instance. Not every kid, but a lot of kids have Switches right now. Get some educational content out on there. Open opportunities, whether it's investments, grants, pools of money, contests. Legitimize educational sections in Steam and the App Store and whatnot. Get some real vetting going on in there. Loosen curriculum requirements, There's a lot to teach out there, even more than the schools can offer. Bridge gaps, help make connections between developers, educators, tech folks, and the games and the gamers themselves. And also, don't forget about foreign markets. It's a big planet. So, in summary, keep education dynamic, make it about the interactions, not about the data, or necessarily the mechanics in the game itself. Problem solving, not memorization. I like to say that school ends at 3 o'clock and gaming starts at 3:01. There is room for a dedicated educational distribution portal and improvements to Steam and the App Store and itch.io and everything. There's definitely room for both. Be open to experiments. The curriculum is always changing. Take some risks, touch other subjects like art. that people don't usually think about when it comes to educational games. Don't break the law. Familiarize yourself with COPPA. And then devs, educators, and investors really need to be working together and forgetting about the disaster that was the shutdown of the Learning Company. That was almost 20 years ago. Get over it. We can start over. But yeah, that will lead us to questions. So if anybody has any, I can take them right now. We got 5 minutes. Otherwise, if you want some games like the ones I've made, or you just want to get in touch, here's my contact info, and thank you. Any questions? Yes?
How much of the struggle do you think is about like intrinsic learning motivations, right? Like people who naturally enjoy learning, because if
Right.
you gotta make it feel like a game, like it shouldn't feel like I'm learning, right? It shouldn't feel like school,
Right.
but it has to have enough of that it is educational.
I think it is important to, as was discussed in a talk earlier, you're always going to have one player who really gets into the data and really starts digging in. Like you take Pokemon Go, for instance, there's some kids who will know that like this particular Pokemon is this type and is like weak to this type and is attracted to this, that, and the other thing, and like they really understand the lore behind it. And then there are other players that are just kind of purely surface level and just play it for the fun of it. The majority of players are just going to play games for the fun of it and are never going to dig too deep into the lore. So making sure that when it comes to education, that you can get as much of it up front without boring the general audience, I would say. That's the tricky balance to try to maintain. Yes?
Can you speak to the value in trying to work with companies to get like big name IPs? Because I know that's a big thing in kids stuff in general, is having recognizable IP from major companies like Disney.
Off the top of my head, I can't. But I can guarantee it's not any easier trying to get an educational IP than it would be to get like Star Wars or Transformers or whatever. I guarantee you the people who, like say you even just want to make a Sesame Street game, for instance, going through Children's Television Workshop, you're going through lawyers, you're going through paperwork, you're going through, everything, and then even once all that's signed, they're keeping an eye on what you're doing to make sure it's true to what they've created, and it's always a struggle. Yes?
Have you had much experience selling into K through 12?
So, what for K through 12?
Directly selling your school to like superintendents and whatnot.
I've tried. I have worked with some educators in the past in terms of like the superintendents and the principals, not as much, but have been in touch with teachers to get a general understanding of what their students are looking for and what they teach in their class and how they would implement games into their lessons.
So you actually haven't tried selling to that population much, you genuinely tried to aim at the...
I have tried selling to the school systems. Usually game purchases come from their rainy day funds and they tend not to touch those because they, kind of save them not just for rainy days, but like days when the school floods and they really need to replace everything. And I think we are out of time, so no more questions? Awesome, thanks everyone.